So in this video specifically, I will try to provide you my own perspective and framework on how I understand and also quantify this risk aspect of the investment. So it might not be the best model or even the most accurate model out there, but hey, it's at least something we can work with. So before I even get to that, remember to help gently tap that like button to help boost my ego as well. Also, this video is sponsored by Weibo. So in case you didn't know, Weibo recently leveled up their game. From now until the 1st of August 2022, every single new signups can get up to $120 USD worth of Microsoft shares. I'll leave the link and instructions down below. Essentially, you just need to deposit a minimum sum of 2,000 Singapore dollars and execute a total of 6 trades in the first 30 days. So 120 USD reward for depositing 1,400 USD. That's an 8% ROI in 1 month. Definitely better than Alibaba. Jokes aside, Weibo also allows for investing into fractional shares. And I don't know why this is not a common feature for other brokerage platforms. So they pride themselves in zero commission trading as well. Don't let this 8% ROI deal get away. Link in the description. Now, getting back to the video. So I'd just like to first thank Crane Shares for putting together the following few slides, which essentially saved me a huge ton of time. Firstly, I think many investors are extremely curious what exactly is already priced in today's valuation around Chinese tech. So essentially, there are both internal and also external factors. But the general categories include delisting concerns, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, even though they aren't really directed at Chinese tech companies, but possibly a potential sanctioning on those said companies becomes chips on the tables of negotiation, and ultimately both China and the US macro and also regulatory outlook. So looking at the timeline of events, we have indeed came a very long way. So the cancellation of an IPO was all the way back in October of 2020. So we have had a range of different events, from Alibaba and Meituan getting issued huge amount of fines, to the entire Didi debacle that only concluded recently, all the way to the HEFCA Act and non-compliance. Recently, however, after a few high-profile senior officials from the CCP, such as Liu He, Li Keqiang, and even Chairman Xi himself, spoke on topics such as regulatory campaigns, the economy, pandemic controls, etc., it does seem like there might be some hint that we might be able to see some light at the end of the tunnel for this entire tech crackdown soon. So as we all know, talk is cheap. On top of just speeches and warnings from senior CCP officials, Crane Shares actually provided some sort of guidance in more concrete steps for the better. So such as the approval of Ant Group into a financial holding company, cyber security reviews completed on controversial companies like Didi Global, and also the video games approval after a year-long hiatus. However, just in the past few weeks alone, we have a slew of quote-unquote negative press around China Big Tech again. China regulators decided to fine Didi more than $1 billion over data security breaches. They also fined Tencent and also Alibaba for disclosure violations, as simply put, they failed to comply with anti-monopoly transaction disclosure laws. So many of these deal violations were dated more than a year ago. So it then left investors wondering, or even more worried about the uncertain future. And the huge question then comes in, will the regulators even let these internet companies go? So what happened to this quote-unquote loosening of the regulatory cycle? I thought it was over. Now, let me pivot over to sharing how I look at this entire situation in China tech crackdown thus far. Firstly, I would like to push back on how Crane Shares framed the entire Chinese internet regulation cycle. So I think it is fairly dangerous to think from such a binary comparison. It cannot be crackdown is going on versus crackdown is over. I think this sort of comparison is far too simplistic. We are probably past elementary school and there are more than 50 shades of grey. Wink wink. Why do you think there are only 2 shades of Chinese regulators? So why do I think that such a mindset is dangerous? It might actually set a preconceived notion in your mind that, hey, I will invest in China when the regulatory cycle is loosened and pull out all my funds when the crackdowns are over. So this train of thought is fairly problematic because for one, you don't know how long each side of the cycle lasts. 2, the intensity of each cycle is highly varied if you're to compare back in the 1516 shadow banking crackdown and this current tech crackdown. And 3, not all regulations are created equal. So there were definitely times where the regulators went overboard, and the EdTech crackdown was a solid talking point for all the bears of China today. So if you want to continue to stay invested in the Chinese internet tech sector, I will sincerely implore you to look at the regulation pieces individually and make specific assessments of said regulations on the company you are invested in today. So I liked how Lilian categorized the regulatory behaviors of the three major economies. In China, they innovate, then regulate. In Europe, they regulate and then not innovate. In the US, they innovate and then try to regulate, but oftentimes fail to do so. So are regulations inherently good or bad? I can't make that judgment for you. But I'll just end off this part of the discussion with this simple thought. There are consequences to every single action. Sometimes the consequences are observed immediately, while other times it might take an extended period of time. So don't be too quick to conclude on the outset saying that, hey, the US way or the China way is the way to go. So I try to assess the regulations in China today independently and try to arrive to my own conclusions. Now, to pivot over to my own mental model on how I look at this entire crackdown episode shenanigans, like all problem solving, we have to first come up with the objective. What do you want to achieve at the end of the day? And what are the motivations or key drivers underpinning many of those said actions? So let's look at the two extremes. If I were to give the government and the regulators the benefit of the doubt and honestly believe in their sincere appeal to correct market failures and to also maybe provide business longevity and even maybe competitiveness in the entire industry, on the other hand, we can look at it from the perspective of them trying to curtail the power of tech conglomerates and ultimately all these so-called tech billionaires and business people. Honestly, if I were to touch my heart and ask myself today, I would actually think that it's a hybrid between the two. That said, I think the regulatory environment in China today has been pretty lackluster during the expansionary phase, and the regulators are essentially quote-unquote just catching up for now. So naysayers like to put forth the argument that, hey, they want to regulate these big tech conglomerates into oblivion because they pose too big a challenge for the government and they can't seem to have any control over them. So I find those sort of commentaries essentially laughable. To not get too political, China is essentially Chinese Communist Party. Their institutions are so entrenched within the entire country, it becomes nearly impossible to oust the entire government. Besides, there is no mechanism for the country to do so anyway. However, I won't say that it's totally impossible. Number two, the concept of power and money still has a very obvious line in China today compared to the rest of their developed counterparts. From China's perspective, the political influence in the US is basically the corruption of capital. From the US's perspective, the political influence in China is basically a dictatorship and a power corruption. So I'm not here to make the judgment of which is more corrupted or which system is better. I'm here, however, to make the assessment of how the Chinese system is going to affect the companies I'm invested in due to various policies and measures. So going back to the overarching objective of the Chinese government, they pride themselves for pushing forth socialist agenda, taking care of the average man or average Joe on the street. They are proud about ending absolute poverty in China after declaring victory some time back. They are motivated by the great Chinese rejuvenation. They have been humiliated for the last few hundred years. So given these sort of circumstances, what do you think are the roles of private enterprises and regulations? So these are extremely tough questions to answer, by the way, but I hope I managed to provide some color and guiding questions for a start. So of course, many of these questions are predicated on rational thinking framework. And like many arguments on the other side, if the man at the top wakes up on the wrong side of the bed today, then all considerations are thrown out of the window if rational thinking framework is not the fundamentals of how we are discussing this entire topic. So some parting words before I go. For existing investors, try to think from an incentive framework and what motivates the regulators or the government in this case. If it comes at the expense of your investments, then I think it's time to leave. On the flip side, I'll sincerely implore all of you out there to put yourself in the shoes of the government and think what would you do given the set of circumstances and the cards that you're dealt with. With that, I'll see you in the next video, but more importantly, I will see you on the moon. Goodbye!